So we're beginning a new lecture here on Chapter 7, the OpenStax microbiology textbook. It's titled Microbial Biochemistry. And for the most part, us and bacteria are so similar so that we could actually change the title just to biochemistry, because almost everything I will say today about microbes also applies to vertebrates and to humans. But since this is a book on microbiology, they decided to title it Microbial Biochemistry. Biochemistry is based on organic molecules. When I write this down, I'm always reminded of this cute movie that my children used to watch. It was Jimmy Neutron, and he was fighting the brains on behalf of all carbon-based organisms and life forms. Whenever I write down organic molecules, I always think of that line because organic molecules are carbon-based. In order to understand how organic molecules are constructed and how they interact with other organic molecules, therefore we have to know something about carbon. Carbon if you look at a periodic table of the elements, it's sort of in the top right. It's unique in that it has a total of 6 electrons. 2 are in an inner shell that can only hold 2, which leaves the 4 remaining electrons in an outer shell. And the outer shell is what's important when thinking about how elements interact with other elements. And the outer shell electrons are called valence electrons. So carbon has 4 valence electrons. Like I said, these are the outer shell electrons, so we can depict this like this. So here's carbon, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4 outer shell electrons. And the deal is that this shell, in order to be chemically stable, has to have 8. All right, so carbon has 4 valence electrons, so it's half full, but it's also then half empty. And so the fact that it has 4 valence electrons means that it needs 4 more. Electrons present in this shell to be chemically stable. And so these 4 electrons are accompanied by, if you will, 4 holes. Where, that's probably not the best picture, where there needs to be another electron. And the way this works then is that electrons form pairs, and so that means that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 places where carbon can have the electrons be paired with another molecule, or excuse me, another atom, and thereby form a chemical bond. All right. So each one of these places, labeled 1 through 4, are capable of forming a chemical bond. All right, so carbon has 4 valence electrons, and these are the outer shell electrons. It needs 4 more electrons in the shell to be chemically stable. Therefore, it can form up to 4 covalent bonds where electron pairs are shared with another atom. Now, the simplest example of this with regard to carbon is if we were to replace these 4 holes with the electrons from 4 hydrogen atoms. And hydrogen is really kind of a weird little atom. It only has 1 valence electron, but it only needs 2 in this outer shell. And so this is demonstrating with these little dots representing electrons how carbon can form 4 stable bonds with hydrogen atoms. And this molecule is in shorthand referred to as CH4. You're potentially very familiar with this. You pay for this to be delivered into your house by way of pipes. That's called methane gas or natural gas. So this is a really very simple organic molecule which is called methane. All right, and if you know anything about chemistry, this is what we call a Lewis dot formula where the electrons are represented as dots. And the other thing I have to point out is the fact that the carbon requires 8 electrons in the outermost shell is called the octet rule. Sorry. Thinking about the next thing I'm trying to say. All right, octet, like octagon, having 8 sides, in October, starting out being the 8th, not the 10th month of the year. So oct is a reference to a Latin word meaning 8. Okay, so, and getting back to carbon now, carbon, since it can form, since it has 4 electrons in a shell, that can hold 8, and so that needs 4 more and can form 4 covalent bonds by sharing its 4 electrons with 4 other entities, then that means that this is an extremely versatile, element. And think about it, you know, how fun would it be if we all had like Tinker Toys with 1 hole? And so in terms of at least elements go, carbon is the most versatile element because it has the most places where it can interact with other elements. Excuse me. So that's carbon. So carbon has 4 valence electrons, and it needs 4 more, so it can form up to 4 covalent bonds. Nitrogen is just a little bit to the left of carbon. Is it left or right? Right, sorry. On the periodic table elements. And as you move right, you gain protons and you gain electrons. So nitrogen has 5 valence electrons. And if we were to draw the Lewis dot formula for nitrogen, it will look like this. There's our 5 valence electrons. If you look, there are 1, 2, 3 holes now, if you will, where it can form covalent bonds with other atoms. So nitrogen has 5 valence electrons. It needs now 3 more. To be stable. And so therefore it can readily interact with up to 3 other atoms. Moving again 1 step to the right, then we have oxygen, which has 1 more electron than nitrogen. So oxygen has 6 valence electrons. In a shell that can hold 8, so 8 minus 6 leaves 2, so it needs 2 more to be stable. And again, it can readily interact now with 1 fewer than nitrogen, which interacts with 1 fewer than carbon, so that would mean 2. So readily interacts with 2 other atoms. Again, in terms of let's just sort of move these out. So if we move these out, carbon looks like this. With 1, 2, 3, needing 4 other electrons. Nitrogen looks like this. With the dots representing electrons and the X's representing places where electrons need to go. So carbon 1, 2, 3, 4. Nitrogen 1, 2, 3. And now oxygen is down here. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so it just needs 1, 2 more valence electrons. All right, so that's just a little bit about the fundamental nature of these elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Remember, hydrogen has 1 lonesome electron, so And it's one of a number of elements that violate the octet rule, but it's actually simpler than the octet rule. It has the first shell only can hold 2 electrons, so hydrogen has 1 electron and it needs 1 more. So if we were to draw hydrogen, hydrogen will look like this. All right, so it has 1 lonesome electron and it needs 1 more. So therefore, hydrogen can readily interact with only 1 and other molecules as I drew it before. All right, so 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and this is how they're like I said, their valence electrons are configured, and this accounts for the fact that carbon is like a tinker toy with 4 holes, nitrogen is like a tinker toy with 3 holes, oxygen is a tinker toy with 2 holes, and hydrogen is that tinker toy that's sort of a dead end, literally with a single hole. All right, now getting back to carbon. Oh, and by the way, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen form something like 90% of your weight for an average human, and even more for microbes because they don't have bones and lots of fluid that contain electrolytes like sodium and potassium and calcium. So getting back to carbon, so carbon, since it has 4 valence electrons and can form 4 covalent bonds, carbon therefore may form rings or long chains. And I'll draw a few of both. And these serve as the backbone for all chemical, or excuse me, all organic and biochemical molecules. All right, so these are by far the most important structural element because you can have a carbon forming bonds with other carbons, making long chains. You can have carbons forming bonds with other carbons. Like that, forming rings. And so these carbon-carbon bonds are essential and fundamental to organic molecules and to biochemistry. Now, in terms of organic molecules, there are 4 main types of organic molecules. There's, in most of these you'll see at the back of like a candy wrapper in terms of the nutritional information. So first we have carbohydrates. So these are sugars and starches for the most part, also include cellulose, which is better known as wood, lipids, lipids are fats and oils. Protein is just that. Protein are basically the molecules that are responsible for performing all the important functions. So rather than, I'm sure you've heard of the word protein before, and you know that eating protein is from a dietary point of view, is good for you because it replenishes nutrients that you need in terms of amino acids. But anyway, so protein, the thing I want you to take home about protein is not an association with something you already know, but rather something new and important in that they perform all the important functions inside, and in many cases outside cells. All right, not well planned out here, so I'm running out of space, so I'll stick number 4 over here. 4 consists of nucleotides and nucleic acids. Again, just to kind of make an association, these are better known as your DNA, and a closely related molecule that's used to shuttle information from the DNA out into the cell to make proteins, in fact, which is called RNA. But nucleotides are monomers, so it includes things like ATP, which you should know is the universal energy carrier inside a cell from my lecture on metabolism. So cells cannot use the energy that's present in fats and glucose directly. It has an apparatus, which is a series of enzymes involved either in fermentation or in cellular respiration that go and harvest the electrons in these carbon-carbon bonds and convert the energy in glucose to something that can be used by the cell, which is called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but before I conclude, I just want to point out that this is the way that the rest of this lecture series on Chapter 7 is organized. I will follow this lecture by one on carbohydrates, and then I'll say a little bit about lipids, fats and oils, and then more about proteins and how they're put together and some of their functions. And lastly, I've already got the lecture on nucleotides and nucleic acids done from last semester.